My name is Thembisa Magele and this is Interface on SABC 3. A warm welcome to you. Happy Easter. Hopefully you're enjoying your Easter break. But Easter time means family time, but it's also spending time. The price of petrol and diesel have increased substantially this month. Economists say workers and low earners will bear the brunt as the price of food and transportation is on the increase. South Africans are already swimming in debt, and the increases will make it impossible for them to service their debt, let alone to save. Meanwhile, the World Bank has urged South Africa to increase savings and investments, saying this will boost the pace of economic growth. But just how can we save? Our guest tonight, Amahauta Mpatlele, who is the CEO of the National Debt Mediation Association, and Lindwell Clark is the head of consumer education at the Financial Services Board. Remember, you can join this discussion by sending us your comments on Facebook. Our page is Interface on SABC3, but unfortunately, we won't be able to take your SMSs. Now, welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Good evening, Thembisa.
Lindwell, how do we start with the balance? On the one hand, it's family time. You want to spend. You want to be good to the people that you love. On the other hand, you're hearing all of these negative reports about things going up, petrol, electricity, food, and you're hearing the World Bank saying we've got to save if we want to boost economic growth in this country. How does an individual strike that balance?
I think it's important to realize that as an individual, you can't stop from spending. I think the thing for us to look at is how much do I spend, and do I spend wisely? I think at this time, especially when it's a festive time and you want to be with your family, you need to look at what is it that I can afford, and what is it that I can give my family on the income that I have. At the end of the day, we need to look at, are we planning our finances properly? And I think this is where it all starts. I see savings as part of a life culture. It's part of who you are. You need to instill that kind of culture in your family from an early age, so that when you plan to go and visit a family at this time of the year, you need to know I have enough money to spend on petrol to get there. I need some money to buy some food when I get there. And if I had planned for it from January, from the beginning of the year already, I might have enough left over to buy some Easter eggs. So I think we need to look at our budgeting, starting to talk to consumers, starting to talk to our children, to our family about what are our needs and then what are our wants.
We want both. We want what we need and we want what we want.
That's the difficult part.
Now, clarify for us. You know, you've got the National Credit Regulator, you've got the Financial Services Board, you've got the National Debt Mediation Association. All of these bodies get a little bit muddled every now and again. What exactly does the FSB do? How do you service us, the public?
The Financial Services Board is the regulator of the non-banking institutions in South Africa. Those are we're talking about investments, the private pension funds. We're also looking at some aspects of banking, and then of course all the insurance industries. Primarily, the Financial Services Board is there to protect consumers via legislation, but through consumer protection, we also look at consumer education. What can we provide, and how can we inform the public of specific tips, specific instances, how they can actually save, first of all, and then secondly, how to deal with financial services providers. And I think this is an important aspect that we're looking at in a regulatory environment, trying to deal with only authorized and registered services providers. Because once you go outside that sphere, the Financial Services Board or any other regulator cannot protect you as the consumer.
You're on your own there.
You're on your own.
Asmahout, the National Debt Mediation Association, how do you play in? What's your role?
Okay, in terms of the National Credit Act, the Act requires credit providers to contribute to combating over-indebtedness. So this is an initiative by the credit industry where they set up a body to say, you need to mediate between us and the consumer. Because once there's a dispute or disagreement, you have two options. You can go to court or you can go through mediation, which means the two parties sit together and you try and find a win-win solution for the two parties, whereas in court, one party wins and the other loses.
Okay.
And their contribution is that we provide that service for free to consumers. They can come to us if they have a complaint against the credit provider, the house is being repossessed, the house is being auctioned, the car is being repossessed, or they want to negotiate, there's no agreement.
Asmahout, clarify this for us. I just bought a Ferrari, not really, but hypothetically. I buy a Ferrari and I buy a mansion. and then I look at my finances and I think, I'm not really too keen on paying the repayments that come with the purchases that I have done. So I come to you and I say, please, can you sit down with Ferrari, can you sit down with my bank and let's structure something where I pay 1,000 Rand a month on each of these because that's all I can afford. Is that something that we can do?
Well, the consumers that we see are in trouble for mainly two reasons. A change in circumstances. A change in circumstances can be you were married, you are now divorced, there were 2 salaries in the house, now you have to work with 1 salary. You were retrenched, you were in a relationship where you were helping each other to pay some of the debts, that relationship changes, you lose your job, or you work in a sector, for example, you know, a journalist, some of them are freelancers. This month you've got a nice job, the following month you don't have a nice job, your income goes down, or you depend on commission and that month you don't make as much commission. That's one area. The other area is that unplanned expenses where, you know, things like your increases, you know, they hit you, your medical bills, there's a death in the family. So it's all those reasons that a lot of consumers end up not being able to service their debts. And those are the circumstances that we look at. We sit down and we say, what are your circumstances? And we present that to the credit provider to say, there's been a change. This person still intends to pay you. In the process, we do educate. There's nothing wrong with having a Ferrari if you can afford it. But if you can't afford it, then there's an issue. So we do education as well.
Irresponsible, you turn me away immediately.
Well, it's rare to find somebody who has been irresponsible. Where there's been irresponsibility, the two parties are also at fault, the credit provider and the consumer. Because the law says the credit provider has to do an affordability assessment. A lot of the time, we don't tell the credit provider the truth. You go there, you sit with a consultant, you say, how much are your groceries? You know, 500? You say, no, man, no, just say 100 Rand. And you agree. And that's unlawful. The credit provider has to do a proper affordability assessment. Check your credit bureau report.
In the case that they haven't done that, do you clamp down on them?
No, that's not the sphere of the FSB. That is the National Credit Regulator. They look after credit providers and credit suppliers. The FSB only comes in if there's a legislative dispute.
Okay.
All other disputes get channeled to the Ombudsman. And if there's a complaint with regard to contractual issues, those goes to the Ombudsman. If it's legislative, it will come to the FSB.
All right. On that note, when we are in debt and we want to spend, what we usually turn to do is to get into more debt, or we turn to get-rich-quick schemes. We talk about that right after this break. Stay with us. And you're watching Interface here on SABC 3. Our guests tonight, Magauta Mphahlele and Lindwell Clark, talking about saving in a time of huge indebtedness and also in a time of rising costs. Now let's just take a look at some numbers here. 19.6 million South Africans are credit active, but only 10.38 million are up to date with their repayments. That is a scary, scary number. And the rate or the ratio of household debt to disposable income is 76.3%. That is a serious number. So when you hear this number and you then have to go out and say to consumers, you've got to save, what is the message? How do we save in a time like this?
I think it goes both ways. Ideally, we'd like to get you before you buy that Ferrari in terms of providing you with enough information to make an informed decision. I think a lot of us go and we make a decision based on social pressures, based on what my neighbor has. So once you get to that point where you actually decide you're going to buy the Ferrari, we're also saying from our side in terms of shop around. First find out what is the cheapest rate in terms of buying the Ferrari on credit. But once you've bought that Ferrari and now 3 months down the line, you realize but you can't make the payments. There's actually no way in which you can save until that point where you get out of the debt. Because like I said at the beginning, you need to spend less than what you earn in order for you to save. And this is where the question of needs, wants and greed comes in. And sometimes we move to the third tier of greed when we see what other people have and we want. So it's difficult at that point, and at that point you need to seek help. I think Most of us sit in a situation where we're in a financial predicament, but we don't want to seek help. Or alternatively, we don't know where to seek help. And that is what we're trying to say at the FSB. You need to first find out, what is it that I can do about my debt? Who are the people that can actually assist me? Because there are mechanisms out there, like Mahauta's association. There's the National Credit Regulator. There's debt counselors that can assist you in the situation. But I think the first point is to admit that I'm in trouble.
I have a problem.
That's it.
Ask Mahaut, we can look at our finances and we can budget and we can have all of these great plans, but we also want to keep up with the Kumalos, you know? We're seeing what they have and we want what they have. So some of the tips that Lindwell has given us are great, but at the mediation stage where we have gotten into trouble and the credit providers are bombarding us with all sorts of goodies, yummy goodies, great goodies, which are not necessarily good for our pockets.
Yeah.
What do we do in that scenario?
Well, the National Credit Act is very clear that what options are available to a consumer once they cannot repay their debt. I think the first option for you to do is to contact your credit provider and explain the circumstances. But the problem is that a lot of consumers don't understand that process. They usually end up in a call center, and the call center person has been trained to demand so much and not compromise. They don't necessarily look at your situation. So that's where we come in to assist you with that process and also to explain all the options that are available, like debt counseling.
Let's talk about that very option of debt counseling. Some
Yes.
horror stories out there. Somebody who is already in huge debt goes for debt counseling and they tell you, okay, we're going to consolidate your debt, and then at the end of each month they take their share and they leave you swimming in more debt.
Well, there are good and bad debt counselors. Unfortunately, that is the case. But debt counselors are regulated individuals. They are supposed to register with the National Credit Regulator, and they are supposed to comply with certain conditions of registration in terms of how they need to deal with the consumer and what kind of service. The fees that they charge are also regulated, have been published by the regulator.
But how can I deal with that as a consumer? What must I ask if I go for debt counseling? I'm not going to know, who's regulated and who's not, who's registered and who's not. How do I tell that I'm dealing with somebody that's straight up?
You have to ask those questions. Are you registered?
Show me the proof.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sure they have to have a registration certificate. What fees are you charging? They need to show you the fees that are regulated by the NCR. What are my rights and responsibilities in the process? Because a lot of consumers just dump their case with the debt counselor and they go away and they think it will sort itself out. What does the process entail? What are you as a debt counselor supposed to do? What is the responsibility of the credit provider? What is my responsibility as a consumer? Because that process is strictly regulated. If it's not done in a particular way within a specific time frame, then it can disadvantage the consumer. But consumers must also understand that it's not the only option available. You can debt counseling is a choice that you make to say, this is the process that will work for me, depending also on your circumstances.
What other options are there? Because if you find yourself up to your eyeballs in debt, you're thinking, save me, somebody save me. What else can people do?
Well, unfortunately, also the way the Act is structured, there are certain credit agreements that are excluded from going under debt review. Okay. If the credit provider has already started taking legal action against you, they've issued what we call a Section 129 notice. That credit agreement might not be included under debt review. So you have to then negotiate directly with the credit provider or use mediation. In our case, or what we call alternative dispute resolution agents, which could be an ombudsman or somebody who independently is doing it. So, and once it's excluded, that's where we come in. Or once you are in debt review and you feel that your debt review process has not been handled properly by the credit provider, who's usually responding to what the debt counselor has or hasn't done, you also deal with those disputes.
All right. And then in terms of the financial services providers, so your insurance company or your funeral parlor or whoever it is that you're dealing with, and you find that, there's some unsavory business that might be going on and you're not quite sure what to do as a consumer. Do we pick up the phone and call the FSB? And if so, what do we say?
Indeed you do. Like Mahata said, you need to find out whether the service provider is registered or authorized, first of all, to sell that kind of product or to be a debt counselor. So if you're not sure, if the person says I'm registered, doesn't mean that they are registered. So you either pick up the phone, you phone the FSB on the toll-free number, and they will tell you whether that person is authorized to sell that specific product. Alternatively, you can go onto the website, because all of the service providers are listed on our website. So it's a situation where you have to do the work. You as the one,
That's your responsibility.
it's your
as a
responsibility,
consumer.
but it's also your right to know. Okay, on this side, first of all, are you registered? What kind of premiums are you going to pay? What is your commission that you are going to get from this? So all of this kind of information you need to know before you start engaging with financial services providers.
All right, Interface on SABC 3, that's how you find us on Facebook. Give us your thoughts. How do you deal with your debt situation? How do you deal with your financial services providers? We're back after this. And we're talking to the head of consumer education at the Financial Services Board, Mr. Linwell Clark, and also the CEO of the National Debt Mediation Association, Magauta Mphahlele. We're talking about how to save in a time of extreme debt, and also in a time where rising costs are a problem. Now, over the past couple of months or a couple of years even, we've been hearing every now and again of pyramid schemes that surface, and people get drawn in, they lose huge monies. We heard about the case of Herman Pretorius very recently, and we're also hearing about Defence X, and the jury is still out about what that is. But how do these pyramid schemes operate when there is a regulator and a watchdog that's supposed to be alert, and that's the FSB? Are you sleeping on the job?
Not quite. I think pyramid schemes is a voluntary association. It's something that you go into, I think, I hope, with your eyes open, but it's also not regulated. Pyramid schemes are not regulated by the FSB. And I think up to a point where you decide to get involved in a pyramid scheme, the FSB or the regulator can still protect you. After that, it becomes a case for the criminal justice system, because then it becomes an area which is not regulated. You went into it with your eyes open. It's a voluntary association, like I said. So after that, the regulated entities can't really assist you. I think it's important that we do our homework. It's very, very important that you look
As
first
consumers.
as a consumer before you start giving your money to people. Remember, it's your money. And before people start bamboozling you with interest rates and returns on investments of 25% to 30%.
Very impressive.
It is. But you know what they say, if it's too good to be true, then it is too good to be true.
But how do you spot a pyramid scheme? How do you know that? Because the way that it usually comes, you know, it'll be your neighbor, or it'll be somebody you go to church with, or, you know, somebody that comes and says, I have personally made so much money in such a short space of time.
It comes to the financial trust. Who do you trust with your finances? So when you say, I trust my neighbor to advise me on something as important as my money, then I think you've got your priorities a little bit wrong. There are people in the financial industry that you can go to that can give you the proper, correct financial advice. And these people are financial advisors that are registered with the Financial Services Board.
But how do I know that something is a pyramid scheme or not?
Well, you need to get advice from those that know. Because if your neighbor says, I've just gotten so much money back, you need to first find out, where did you invest the money? With who did you invest the money? How did you get that return? And what happens afterwards? For how long is my money going to be in this? So there's a few questions you need to ask before you actually start investing. And once you've gotten that information, you can then go to an advisor who's registered and say, I've gotten all this information. Do you think this thing will work? And that person will then be able to tell you, I think it's a scam, or this is a good investment, maybe you should go for it.
And I want to throw the next one to both of you. When we have high debt levels, and we go to, or we join a pyramid scheme, we get money quick and we are able to pay back our debt, you know? So a lot of people actually tend to support pyramid schemes because the money is there, you see it, it's quick and it goes in. But what can we do to try and bring down that level of excitement around pyramid schemes? Give us some shock values.
The reality is that it's not sustainable, because it depends on how many members you recruit. Usually the ones that will make money are the ones that come in when the pyramid starts. Because as it builds up, you know, it depends on people bringing in money. So it doesn't have money of its own. it depends on you bringing the money. They take your money to pay the next person. So at some point, it does crumble. So it's not sustainable.
But how do you know if it's a pyramid scheme or a stokvel? You know, we have
well,
all
usually
sorts of
pyramid
good
schemes
like
will operate in the sense that they will say that you need to recruit so many people in order to get so much. So where you are told to recruit people in order to get those, your alarm bells, and also the returns that are promised are very high. Yeah. I mean, we know what interest rates we get in a bank. So if somebody says, I'll give you 30% in a month, then there's a problem there. You need to go and ask questions. I think the Reserve Bank has done quite a lot of education on pyramid schemes, what they look like, what you need to look out for. So people need to do that. The problem with getting out of debt is that you need to change your behavior. And that is the most difficult thing to do. It takes time. Because you have to change how yourself, you have to change your relationship with money, you have to change your relationship with your family, because what we find in families is that these issues are never discussed. We have husbands that are over indebted and the wife doesn't know the wife, or nobody knows who's doing what with money. It's a difficult thing to now start sitting around the table and talking about those issues.
We just read recently and we saw recently in the press that, for example, Defence X, the FSB would sound the alarm and say, we're investigating, or there's unsavory business going on here. But the investors come out, the ones that have put money in Defence X, come out and say, leave them alone, they're doing great, they are good for us. Are you despondent when you see stuff like that as the regulator?
The FSB can only act when something goes wrong. And in this case, especially when it comes to pyramid schemes. And unfortunately, at that time, it's a bit too late. Because like Mahata said, the sustainability of these kind of schemes is always questionable. Because at some stage or the other, the perpetrators or those that are heading these schemes, they get caught out. And that is when, because now you invest in the person, you invest in your neighbor, because your neighbors actually said that you must join, but you didn't look at the whole scheme and the viability of the sustainability of it. So I think we need to change the way we think about our money. We need to decide, am I just going to go for quick rich? Or is there a way in which I can save for the long term for specific things like education, for buying a house?
Yes, because the next thing I was going to ask is there such a thing as good debt, or is debt really just bad from the get-go?
The reality is that you can't do without debt, most of us. We all need a house. Houses are very expensive, so we have to buy them on credit. A car, with cars the issue is what kind of car. You know, that's the only decision.
And South Africans, we love our cars. We love our cars.
Education, you know, things that you will get a return out of, things that are really necessary. But things like, you know, credit cards, buying clothes, going on holiday, are those really necessary?
Okay, maybe holidays are good for the mind as well. So let's not club them in with that. And for the body. Final words from you? Final tips as we are rounding off Easter?
I think at a time like this, we need to speak to our families about money. We need to budget together. We need to sit down and say, what can we as a family afford? Because most of the time, the needs, or rather the wants of the kids becomes the needs of the parents. So the kid wants his Levi jeans, and dad thinks, where am I going to get the money from? Because now it becomes a real issue for me, because if I don't buy my son the Levi jeans, he'll be out of the peer group.
Oh boy.
And that becomes a problem.
And he will not like me very much if I do not give him what he wants. It's true, that is what happens. But hopefully you've gained some tips on how to manage the debt if you've got, or how to manage your finances as a whole. Thank you so much for joining us for this program. Thank you to my guests for coming through. That's how we come to the end of this week's program. Join us again next week at the same time. From me, Tembisa Machel and the team, goodbye.